How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 1000. Today is January 1st, 2022, as I wish you all a happy new year, as today we're going to focus on two potentially major snowstorms that could impact the northeast, that could bring potentially over a foot of snow in some areas, depending on which scenario ends up being correct with each of the reliable computer models. And we'll also focus on the currently major severe weather threat that's occurring in the southeast, as well as the current major snowstorm that's impacting the Midwest at this time. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the GFS computer model, and this is how it looks right now, or how it forecasted the radar look, and it's pretty accurate. We are of course seeing snow in the Midwest, and we're seeing some thunderstorm activity further southward where there's just enough of a jet stream dip to induce some severe weather right around the southeast. But first we're gonna focus on the two next major snowstorms that could impact the northeast, because that's probably the thing you guys in the northeast are wondering about the most, and it's already pretty certain at this point that you guys will experience major snow in the Midwest, so we won't focus on it very much in this video, but I'll talk briefly about it a little bit later. But if we were to take a look at what the GFS model is currently stating when it comes to this next potential northeast snowstorm, so if we were to move forward, we of course see that snowstorm that brought close to a foot of snow in some areas in the Midwest move. We're gonna see it move further northeastward, and as it does so, you see that right behind this low pressure system there's a very significant jet stream dip, and that will induce of course a very unstable environment right around the southeast, which is causing the extremely bad severe weather that's happening in the southeast right now. And if we were to continue to move forward, there's gonna be so much instability to a point where we're gonna see enough buoyancy in the atmosphere, enough buoyancy with the air molecules for a low pressure system to develop, and it's gonna allow for convection right around the center of circulation, which will create our next snowstorm for the northeast, because there's just going to be so much lift in the atmosphere that it's going to pretty much originate a low pressure system right around the southeast, and that could create our next snowstorm for the northeast. You see, as we continue to move forward, you see that in this run the GFS model is very lenient on strengthening this low pressure system very rapidly, where we do even see extremely heavy snowfall rates right around the mid-Atlantic, which includes Virginia. Portions of the Delmarva Peninsula are getting involved with very high snowfall rates, and even southern New Jersey, and maybe the big cities could get involved as well if the GFS model scenario was correct, which would include areas such as Washington D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia could get involved, and maybe even as far north as New York City and Boston. They could experience some snow flurries out of this low pressure system if the GFS model is correct. So while we're only barely around less than 48 hours away from this event, there's still high uncertainty, unfortunately, which is very surprising, because typically during this time frame, when we're less than 48 hours out from an event, we're pretty certain, or at least around the ballpark, with what's going to happen. But this is one of those cases where that's not necessarily the case, because while the GFS model is still persisting on bringing a major snowstorm to the northeast, it becomes an entirely different story when we take a look at the European model, because the European model is still persistent on bringing a fairly weak snowstorm for the mid-Atlantic. But I will point out that the European now is definitely more lenient on bringing some sort of snowstorm in the mid-Atlantic than before, because in the runs a couple of days ago, the European model wasn't saying any of that. It wasn't forecasting any sort of major snowstorm or any snowfall at all in the mid-Atlantic. Now the European model has made that adjustment that we're going to see a snowstorm, at least a small snowstorm somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. However, it's still nowhere near the magnitude, and it won't bring snow in a scope as big as of an area as the GFS model, which definitely raises the uncertainty of who exactly this snowstorm will impact. While the European model does want to bring Decent amount of snow throughout the mid-Atlantic, more specifically northern North Carolina, Virginia, and of course the Delmarva Peninsula. For the areas further northward, the European doesn't really want to bring any sort of snow. So places like Washington, D.C. would miss out on snow in this scenario. Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and even right around New York City, you'll miss out on a lot of that snowfall if the European model was correct. But it becomes a completely different story with the GFS, which is still the reason why we have large uncertainty with this low pressure system, despite it being only around 24 hours out before we experience this event. So it's going to be one of those difficult scenarios of forecast over the next several hours. We're going to have to wait and see which computer model ends up leaning more towards a certain one, because that will definitely raise the certainty of which forecast will be correct. We need to see if maybe the GFS model will eventually mimic more of the European, or the other way around, where the European may potentially mimic what the GFS model is saying, and that would bring a much more major snowstorm in terms of heavy snowfall and scope in terms of area to the northeast. We need to just wait and see on that. But if we were to compare the snow totals and where exactly they're bringing the heaviest snow and how heavy and how much snow you should expect, you see that the European model, while the European model, like I said, doesn't bring snow in a scope that's as large as the GFS model when it comes to area, you see that it's still bringing a pretty hefty amount of snow throughout Virginia and the Delmarva Peninsula, where Virginia Beach is getting involved with right around 6 to 12 inches of snow, and just south of Richmond you're getting involved in 6 to 12 inches of snow, and a lot of the southern portion of Delmarva Peninsula is experiencing 6 to 12 inches of snow in the European model scenario. However, if you go north, let's say just north of maybe Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, the snow totals really just drop to the point where there's no snowfall accumulation in Washington, D.C. There's no snow in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City. None of those major cities are receiving snow in this scenario based on what the European model is saying. And you see that even further southward, the snow is extending to the northern portion of North Carolina. So Raleigh, North Carolina could get involved. And you see that even as far east as the Outer Banks could get involved in some accumulating snow in this scenario, which isn't something you typically see in the Outer Banks, where typically it's somewhat rare to see accumulating snowfall throughout the year along the Outer Banks. Mainly because you guys are pretty much hugging the Gulf Stream, which warms up the air temperature as a result during the winter, which prevents a lot of accumulating snow from occurring right around the Outer Banks. But this could be your chance where you do experience accumulating snow right around the Outer Banks. And you see that, of course, higher elevations of Tennessee and North Carolina are receiving snow as well out of this low pressure system, because, of course, the higher you go, the lower the temperature gets. But let's compare it to the GFS model, and you're going to see such a stark difference when it comes to the forecast. So showing you guys a GFS model, you see that not only the area of snow is larger, where, let me go to the latest one. This is the 18Z run. This is what the GFS model is currently forecasting. If I were to show you guys, you see that the GFS model, even more than the last one, wants to bring snow to a larger area, a much larger area than the European model, where we're seeing snow as far north as New York City accumulating snowfall at that. While comparing that to the European model, it doesn't want to bring snow north of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, which is a huge stark contrast when it comes to the area of snow. And it's not only the area that is different between the two computer models, it's also the amount of snowfall accumulation, because in the GFS model scenario, this will be an extremely major snowstorm, and it's concerning that the forecast is still this uncertain when we're this close to the actual event from occurring. Because if, let's say, the GFS model ends up being correct, then you guys are going to have very little prepare time, if any at all, because because this forecast could change. This forecast is still uncertain, even though we're only less than 48 hours out from the event. And if the GFS model's case was correct, you'd see that we'd experience well over a foot of snow throughout many areas. This includes Richmond, this includes the Delmarva Peninsula getting involved with over a foot of snow. Ocean City, Maryland, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware is getting involved with over a foot of snow, and a lot of New Jersey as well is experiencing right around 6 to 12 inches. And in terms of big cities, you see even Washington D.C. is getting involved in 6 to 12 inches. Baltimore is right on the border of 3 to 6 to 6 to 12. And Philadelphia is right around experiencing around 3 to 6 inches, and 1 to 3 right around New York. So it is definitely concerning, because with such little prepare time for a snowstorm that could potentially be as major as this, bringing over a foot of snow, it definitely does raise a big concern if the GFS model ends up being correct. So I'd say, especially in the mid-Atlantic, prepare as if a major snowstorm is occurring, because it's better to be safe than sorry. While the European model is leaning less on a major snowstorm for the mid-Atlantic, the GFS model says otherwise, as it wants to bring an extremely major snowstorm throughout the mid-Atlantic. So we're just gonna have to wait and see if one forecast model leans closer to the other, which will definitely give big insight on which forecast will be correct. So yeah, you guys in the mid-Atlantic need to pay close attention to this in the future, because it's still very uncertain. Make sure to prepare in the mid-Atlantic, and even as far north as New York City, you might need to keep in mind of this, because there's still high uncertainty with the forecast like the GFS model states. However, that's not our only snowstorm we're going to talk about in this video that could impact the Northeast, because we do have another potential of a major snowstorm which could even impact a much larger area than what even the GFS model is forecasting with this first snowstorm. So if I were to continue to move forward, you see that if we were to move right around the 4-day mark, we begin to see a little bit of a clipper system move through the Midwest, and it brings a strong northwesterly flow that will induce a very significant jet stream dip, and that could set up for our next major snowstorm for Northeast, because right behind it we see a low pressure system come pretty much moving southeastward from the Pacific Northwest, and it could encounter an unstable air mass for a major snowstorm to potentially occur right around the 6th or 7th of January, right around the Northeast. So if we were to continue to move forward, you see the low pressure system develops right around North Carolina and Virginia, where we're seeing heavy snow throughout. We're seeing heavy snow throughout the Delmarva Peninsula. New Jersey is getting involved. Connecticut, even Pennsylvania, upstate New York City is getting involved. This would be an extremely major snowstorm. And yes, while this forecast is still around 4, 5 to 6 days out, it definitely becomes it's definitely at least something to be aware of, because the European model is also agreeing that we're going to see a major snowstorm, and in fact it's a little bit more significant than what the GFS model is forecasting. So when we see both of the main computer models agree on a certain scenario, even if it's 5 days out, it's definitely at least something we need to be aware of in the Northeast, because this could potentially be major. And you're probably wondering, how much snow should you expect from this second potential snowstorm? So if we were to continue to move forward, of course we will see this first snowstorm move through as the European model does expect, but still a very different forecast between the European and GFS model. But the second snowstorm, if we were to move forward with that, you see that it'd bring a large area of 3 to 6 inches of snow, and even close to, if not over, a foot of snow in some areas of the Northeast, because you see West Virginia is getting involved in right around 6 to 12 inches of snow. Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey is getting involved with right around 6 to 12 inches of snow, and even right around Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York, you could get involved in 6 to 12 inches of snow if the European computer model was correct in this scenario. And if we were to compare that to the GFS computer model, the GFS computer model is also leaning on bringing right around the same amount of snow and a significant snowstorm right around the 5-day mark. So if we were to continue to move forward, you see that still a large area of the Northeast will experience 6 to 12 inches of snow and maybe over a foot of snow in some areas along the East Coast. So it is something you guys want to be aware of over the next several days, because right around the 6th or 7th of January, we could see our next major snowstorm in the Northeast. However, again, there's still a lot of uncertainty. I need to point that out because we're still around 5 days out from this second snowstorm from occurring. What will really determine if a second snowstorm occurs is really how significant this jet stream dip will be, because if the jet stream dip isn't pronounced enough, then there might not be enough of an unstable environment right around the eastern half of the Northeast for a low pressure system that's powerful enough to develop for any sort of snowstorm to develop. However, there's also other scenarios, and it's also the position of where this jet stream dips, because when we're talking about forecast 5 days out, there's still that possibility that the jet stream could dip in different areas. We could potentially maybe see a jet stream dip that's focusing a little bit more eastward, and that would steer the worst of the storm further eastward out to sea for the most part, and that certainly would limit the snowfall in the Northeast. And there's also another scenario where maybe the jet stream dip occurs a little bit further westward, where it's more of a Midwest snowstorm threat than a Northeast snowstorm threat. There's still that possibility. While the GFS model and the European model are both agreeing with a track that's right around the ballpark within each other, there's still also that possibility we could see potentially major adjustments when it comes to a forecast, as there's still a possibility this snowstorm doesn't occur at all in the Northeast. I need to put that out there, but with the GFS model and the European model both leaning towards a major snowstorm right around the 6-day mark, it's at least something to be aware of, especially when they're very close in terms of their forecast and their trajectory of the low pressure system. So that's definitely something we need to keep in mind over the next several days throughout the Northeast, because that could be our potentially second major snowstorm in a week for the Northeast. But now let's take a look at what's currently happening right around the Midwest and the Southeast, and you see that we're seeing a heavy amount of snow throughout Chicago, extending to Milwaukee as well. You're seeing heavier snow bands. Detroit is experiencing some snow, as a lot of these areas could experience over a foot of snow. However, since the slow pressure system is quickly moving to the east, the snow should eventually end in Chicago in the relatively near future. As you could see that you guys are relatively close to a dry slot, which is just to the east of you guys, the west of you guys, but Milwaukee still is in a heavy snow band. But again, we should see the snow end within a couple of hours, as we're going to see eventually that right around the 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or around the 7 p.m. Standard Time area of Chicago, you should eventually get out of the snowfall. But Milwaukee still should continue and should stay in the snowfall over the next 2 hours. But if we were to continue to move further southward, we do see a squall line moving through the southeast, as these thunderstorms could potentially be severe. So watch out if you're in the southeast. You could experience a tornado threat, large hail, and damaging winds out these thunderstorms. The tornado threat will mainly be isolated, mainly because there isn't enough wind shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere to create a very major tornado threat, but there's still certainly a possibility. But large hail and damaging winds should be the biggest threat for you guys right around southeast out of these thunderstorms. So if we were to take a look at the severe weather, the areas where you should expect the worst of severe weather, it mainly should be focused in right around northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, and extending to Tennessee. And even further southward, closer to Louisiana, the midsection of Alabama and Mississippi, Georgia, you still do have a slight chance of severe thunderstorm activity, and the tornado threat could be is more focused in on northern Alabama, so watch out for that. But the main threat will likely be damaging winds and potentially an isolated tornado with maybe a small chance of hail with around 5%. So make sure to keep that in mind in the southeast for today. And if you're under a tornado warning, make sure to take cover on the lower levels of your basement, because it could save your not only your life but other people's lives as well. Next, let me show you guys the 2 snowstorms you need to watch. Of course, the first snowstorm could happen as early as tomorrow, and it's unfortunate that there's still this much uncertainty with this first snowstorm because it could potentially be major. So in the mid-Atlantic, you need to prepare as if maybe a foot or so is falling, because it's better to be safe than sorry. And of course, we're going to be keeping tabs on this second snowstorm over the next 5 days because it could potentially be our next major snowstorm for the Northeast. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. And I hope you guys have a good day and a happy new year.